My cousin shoved my vomiting newborn into my arms and hissed, "You will pay for my blouse!" For a second, I just stood there, arms locked around Charlotte's warm little body, like my joints had forgotten how to move. The smell hit me next, sharp and sour, milky and unmistakably human, spreading across Alice's chest in a glossy, ruined streak. We were in my living room, the kind of room you try to make look calm when you're not calm at all. A rented folding table pushed against the wall, paper plates stacked in neat towers, a platter of fruit I'd arranged at 3 in the morning because I couldn't sleep, and a small bouquet of flowers on the coffee table that looked too cheerful for how tight my throat felt. 4 weeks postpartum is a strange time to host anything. Your body still feels like it belongs to someone else. Your mind is a swarm of checklists and worry, and you keep smiling anyway because everyone's come to meet the baby. Like the baby is a new restaurant they've heard about. I'd called it a little welcome ceremony, something gentle and sweet. No big speeches, just family, a few close friends, soft music, and Charlotte in her tiny white onesie with the little embroidered collar. I wanted one afternoon where I wasn't alone in the nursery listening to the heater click on and off, wondering if I was doing any of this right. Alice arrived like she was walking into an event with photographers. Designer blouse, cream-colored, so soft it almost looked liquid, hair perfect, nails glossy, the kind of woman who never seems to have lint on her clothes, even in winter. She did that quick scan of the room people do when they're deciding what to judge first, then smiled like she'd approved. I told myself not to notice. I told myself it was just my hormones making everything feel sharp. People took turns holding Charlotte. Everyone did the same little routine. Wash hands, hover awkwardly, lower their arms like they were handling a fragile candle. I watched them closely because that's what new mothers do. We watch, even when we pretend we're relaxed. When it was Alice's turn, she held out her arms with a practiced confidence, like she'd done it 100 times. Her smile widened, and for a moment I almost felt relief. Maybe this would be easy. Maybe this wouldn't turn into one of those memories you replay at night. I placed Charlotte into her arms and kept my hands nearby, not quite letting go, my fingertips still brushing the baby's back as if my touch could prevent anything bad from happening. Alice looked down at Charlotte and her expression softened, just slightly. "She's tiny," she said, and it wasn't cruel. It was almost surprised, like she'd forgotten babies are real, not props. Charlotte blinked up at her. A small sound escaped my daughter's throat, a little wet hiccup, the kind that makes every mother's body tense before her mind catches up. I opened my mouth to say, "She might," but it was too late. Charlotte's stomach turned with that sudden, unstoppable newborn force, and the milk came up, warm and fast, spilling straight onto Alice's blouse. It splashed across the front like someone had poured cream soup down the center of her chest. The fabric darkened instantly. There was a beat of silence so pure it felt staged. Then Alice's face changed. Not startled, not just disgusted, wounded, as if my baby had insulted her on purpose. She jolted backward, eyes wide, mouth open, her arms stiffening like she'd been shocked. She shoved Charlotte toward me, and I grabbed my daughter with a reflex that felt older than language, pulling her into my chest, turning my body so Charlotte's cheek pressed into my collarbone. Alice stared down at her blouse as if it were a crime scene. Someone behind me made a tiny, awkward laugh that died immediately. My mother stepped forward with that automatic hostess urgency, hands already reaching for napkins. "Oh, honey, it's okay. It's just a baby." Alice's eyes snapped up. Her voice went low, sharp, meant for me. "You will pay for this." My face burned, not with anger yet, more like shame, like I'd been exposed, like I'd failed some invisible test in front of everyone. I bounced Charlotte gently, patting her back. Her little body relaxed against me, warm and oblivious, and that contrast, her innocence against Alice's outrage, made my stomach twist. "I'm so sorry," I said, and my voice sounded thin. "She's been a little spit-uppy today. I should have warned you." Alice didn't take the napkins. She didn't let my mother dab at the fabric. She took one step back, then another, holding her arms away from her body like she couldn't stand her own clothes touching her skin. "It's ruined," she whispered, staring at the stain as if it had swallowed her whole. My mother looked panicked. "I have a shirt. Here, take mine. We'll get it cleaned, sweetheart." Alice's laugh came out like a sob. "Your shirt?" she snapped, and then she looked around, eyes glossy, seeing us all as witnesses. "Do you have any idea what this is? Do you know how much this cost?" No one answered. The room had that frozen holiday dinner feeling, where everyone's suddenly too interested in the chips and the napkins and the way the ceiling fan turns. Alice's lips trembled. She shook her head and turned away fast, heels clicking hard against my hardwood floor. She walked straight through my hallway like she owned it, yanked open my front door, and vanished outside. The door shut behind her with a clean, final sound. Charlotte made a soft little whimper, then settled again, her breath warm against my chest. I kept patting her back, staring at the closed door as if I could undo the last 30 seconds by staring hard enough. My mother's face was tight with embarrassment. Someone murmured, "Babies, right?" like a joke that didn't land. Someone else pretended to cough. I forced my legs to move. I walked out to the driveway, the cold air hitting my skin like a slap. Alice was sitting in her car with the engine off, shoulders shaking. Through the windshield, I could see her hands on the steering wheel, knuckles white. I stopped a few feet from her door because I didn't know if she'd scream at me if I got too close. I knocked gently on the glass. She didn't look at me. "Alice," I said, keeping my voice calm, keeping it small. "I'm sorry. I didn't want that to happen. She's a newborn." Her head turned slowly, and when she looked at me, there was something in her eyes that wasn't grief. It was blame, pure, focused blame. "You people think because you had a baby, the whole world has to accept your mess," she said, voice shaking. "You're all smiling in there while I'm sitting here covered in it." "I'm not smiling," I said, and I surprised myself with how flat my tone was. "I'm holding my 4-week-old who can't control her body." Alice's jaw tightened. "I don't care," she said. "That blouse is $1,800. The number felt unreal in my head, like she'd told me the temperature on Mars. "I didn't ask you to wear something like that," I said, and immediately wished I hadn't. Alice's mouth twisted. "Of course you didn't," she said, "because you don't think about other people." That one landed, not because it was true, but because it was the kind of sentence that sticks, the kind that makes you question yourself at 3 a.m. while your baby cries and the house is dark. Charlotte shifted in my arms, tiny fingers gripping my sweater, and I focused on that grip to keep from shaking. Behind me, laughter drifted from inside, soft, careful, forced. People trying to pretend the party hadn't cracked down the middle. Alice looked past me toward the house, then back at me, and her voice went even quieter. "Tell your mother to stop offering me rags," she said. "It's humiliating." I swallowed. "I'll talk to her." Alice's eyes narrowed as if she'd caught something. "No," she said. "You'll talk to your wallet." I stood there in the cold, holding my daughter like a shield, and the silence between us felt sharp enough to cut skin. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket, and I didn't even have to look at the screen to know it was going to make everything worse. The call came later that night, after the last paper plate had been scraped clean and thrown away, after the flowers had wilted slightly from the heat, after Charlotte finally slept in her bassinet with one tiny fist curled against her cheek. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing bottles, the overhead light too bright for how tired my eyes were, when my phone vibrated against the counter. I dried my hands on a dish towel that still smelled faintly of bleach and picked it up. It was my mother. I answered because I always do. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Your aunt called me," she said, her voice already tight with the careful tone she uses when she's about to deliver something unpleasant. Alice is beside herself. I leaned my hip against the counter. The tile was cold through my leggings. I tried to talk to her, I said. She didn't want to hear it. Well, my mother replied, and there was a pause. Too long, waited. She says the blouse is ruined, completely, and they think you should reimburse her. The word sat there between us, heavy. Reimburse, I repeated, like I needed to hear it again to understand it. For a baby spitting up. She says it's not just any blouse, my mother said softly. You know how she is. I stared at the sink, at the thin line of milk residue clinging to the inside of a bottle I'd missed. I know exactly how she is. Ja, my mother exhaled, the sound rushing through the phone. They're saying it's 1,800 pounds. The number landed harder the second time. It felt less abstract now, sharper, like someone had pressed a finger into a bruise. That's more than our grocery budget for months, I said, and my voice cracked despite my effort to keep it steady. I know, she said quickly. I told them that. I told them you just had a baby, that money's tight. And, I asked, and your aunt said Alice wouldn't have worn it if she'd known there was a risk, my mother continued, choosing her words carefully. She said it was unfair to expect Alice to absorb that loss. I laughed once. It came out short and dry. Absorb, I said. Like she absorbs living with her parents while earning banker money? Please, my mother warned gently. This is family. That sentence landed like a small slap. Family. The word that's supposed to soften everything, but somehow always sharpens the blade. I didn't invite her to hold the baby, I said. She wanted to. Everyone knows babies spit up. My mother was quiet for a moment. I imagined her sitting at her kitchen table, fingers wrapped around her mug, eyes down. She hates conflict almost as much as she hates choosing sides. They're saying, she said finally, that refusing to pay would make things uncomfortable. I closed my eyes. The overhead light hummed faintly. Charlotte stirred in the other room, making a tiny noise that sent a reflexive jolt through my body. Uncomfortable how? I asked. They didn't say, my mother replied. But you know how Alice can be. She takes things personally. I pictured Alice's stare through the windshield, the way she'd held her arms away from her body like she'd been contaminated. The word humiliating echoed in my head, spoken with such precision. I'm not paying, I said, and the firmness in my own voice surprised me. I can't, and even if I could, I wouldn't. There was another pause, heavier this time. Okay, my mother said finally. I'll tell them. She hung up before I could say anything else. I stood there longer than I meant to, phone in my hand, listening to the quiet of the house. The dishwasher ticked as it cooled. Somewhere outside, a car passed, tires hissing on damp pavement. I thought that would be the end of it, or at least the beginning of a slow fade. Awkward holidays, a few cold looks, the usual family fractures you learn to live around. I was wrong. The next morning, my aunt called me directly. Her voice was bright in that brittle way people get when they've rehearsed what they're about to say. Good morning, she chirped, as if we were discussing brunch plans. I hope you and the baby slept well. We did, I said, because I was raised to be polite even when my stomach tightens. That's good, she said. Listen, Alice is still very upset. She barely slept. She keeps replaying the moment in her head. I pictured Alice in her childhood bedroom, designer clothes hanging in neat rows, the blouse laid out like evidence. The image didn't soften me. I'm sorry she's upset, I said, but my answer hasn't changed. My aunt's tone cooled instantly. You have to understand, she said. This wasn't just an accident. You put her in that position. I didn't, I replied, my grip tightening on the phone. She chose to hold the baby. And you didn't warn her properly, my aunt countered. If you had been more careful... The accusation slid under my skin. She's a grown woman, I said. She knows what babies do. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. So you're really refusing, my aunt said. Yes. Well, she said, her voice lowering, then I suppose Alice will have to explain to the family how she was treated. A chill ran through me. Explain what? How she was embarrassed, my aunt replied smoothly. How she was left sitting in her car crying while everyone inside pretended nothing happened. That's not what happened, I said, my pulse picking up. It's how it felt to her, my aunt said. And feelings matter. The irony almost made me laugh again. Almost. We hung up without resolving anything, and the rest of the day felt off balance. Messages buzzed in my phone, cousins I hadn't spoken to in months asking vague questions. Everything okay yesterday? Heard there was some drama. No one asked me directly. They never do. By afternoon, a group chat I was only half active in lit up. Someone had shared a photo from the ceremony, Alice holding Charlotte, smiling, taken seconds before everything went wrong. The caption read, "Before." I stared at the image, my chest tightening. It was framed like a before and after story, and I could already see where it was headed. That evening, my husband came home and found me sitting on the couch, phone in my lap, Charlotte asleep against my shoulder. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "They want 1,800 pounds, I said without preamble. He blinked. "For the spit up?" "Yes." He shook his head slowly. "That's ridiculous." "I know," I said, "but they're making it into something else." He sat beside me close enough that his knee pressed into mine. "We don't have that kind of money just lying around." "I know." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Even if we did, this feels wrong." His support steadied me, but it didn't stop the unease crawling under my ribs. Because families don't always care about right, they care about smooth. The next day, my mother stopped by unannounced. She held Charlotte for a while, rocking gently, but her eyes kept flicking toward me, searching. "They're not letting this go," she said finally, handing the baby back. "I didn't think they would," I replied. My mother hesitated, then said, "Your aunt mentioned legal options." The words landed with a dull thud. "Legal." She said Alice kept the receipt, my mother added quickly. "I don't think they'd actually do anything, but she wanted you to know." I felt something shift inside me. Not panic yet, but a tightening, a sense of being watched from angles I couldn't see. That night, after everyone else was asleep, I opened my phone again and saw a message from Alice herself, sent an hour earlier. It was only one sentence. "You've made this very public. Don't be surprised when I respond in kind." Before Alice's message could grow teeth in my mind, I retreated into memory the way I always have, quietly, without asking permission, following the thread of how I became the woman standing in that kitchen, weighing other people's expectations against my own exhaustion. I grew up learning the sound of work before I learned the sound of rest. My earliest memories are stitched together with the rhythm of my mother's alarm clock, the metallic click it made when she slapped it silent, the shuffle of her slippers on linoleum before dawn. The house smelled of instant coffee and starch. Money was something spoken about in lowered voices, as if it could hear us. I was the oldest. Responsibility arrived early and never really left. I learned to pack lunches with whatever was left, learned how to stretch a pound of mince into 3 meals, learned how to tell when the electricity was about to be cut because the lights flickered a certain way. None of this felt heroic at the time. It just felt normal. When I was 16, I took my first job after school at a small medical office, filing charts, answering phones. The air always smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. There was a punch clock by the back door, heavy, dented metal, that stamped the time onto thin cards with a mechanical thud. I kept my card folded in my pocket, checking it compulsively, making sure every minute counted. That punch clock became a kind of quiet promise to myself. If I showed up, if I stayed late, if I didn't complain, things would stabilize. They never quite did, but I kept believing they would. I married young. Not because I was swept away, but because stability looked like love from where I stood. My husband was kind enough, steady enough. We built a life that ran on routines, bills paid on time, groceries bought with coupons, holidays planned months in advance so nothing unexpected could derail them. Children came. Joy did too, though it arrived tangled with fear. I learned the weight of worry that sits permanently behind your ribs once you become responsible for another human being. I learned how to function on little sleep, how to make dinner with a baby on one hip, how to smile through conversations while calculating the balance in our bank account. Years blurred together in shades of beige and fluorescent light. School drop-offs, commutes, work, home, repeat. I took on extra shifts when I could, picking up weekend hours at the office when someone called in sick. That punch clock still marked my days, the sound of it grounding and relentless. When my father fell ill, I became the one who rearranged schedules, who sat in hospital rooms listening to machines breathe for him. The chair beside his bed was always too hard, the lights too bright. I learned how to read doctors' faces, how to interpret pauses. After he died, grief didn't explode, it seeped, quietly. I returned to work because that's what you do. You keep going. You punch the clock. My mother needed help after that, not just emotional, practical. I took over her bills, made sure the rent was paid, the fridge stocked. My siblings thanked me, relieved. It felt good to be useful, even as it hollowed me out. Over time, the weight settled into my bones, not unbearable, just constant. When my marriage ended, it wasn't dramatic. It was the slow realization that we were sharing space, not a life. We separated quietly, dividing things with a politeness that felt like defeat. I downsized, took on more hours. The punch clock remained. Alice entered my life fully during those years. She was younger, brighter, already moving through the world with a confidence I'd never had. She talked about internships and bonuses, about clothes she bought on a whim. She laughed easily. When she spoke about money, it was casual, abstract, like weather. At family gatherings, she'd perch lightly on the edge of chairs, immaculate, untouched by the small frictions of living. I admired her in the way you admire something distant. I didn't resent her. Not then. I became the dependable one, the aunt who hosted holidays, the cousin who remembered birthdays, the woman everyone assumed would handle things. There was a particular envelope I kept during those years, plain, manila, tucked into the back of a drawer. Inside were old pay stubs, folded and refolded until the edges softened. I didn't look at them often, but I knew they were there. Proof of time given, hours spent. It was silly, maybe, but that envelope grounded me when I felt invisible. When I met my current husband, it wasn't fireworks. It was warmth. He listened. He didn't rush. We built something slowly, intentionally. When we decided to have Charlotte, it felt like a quiet miracle, unexpected, fragile, precious. Pregnancy at my age wasn't easy. Every appointment carried an undercurrent of risk. Every test result made my heart stutter. I kept working longer than I should have, afraid to lose momentum, afraid to be seen as expendable. The punch clock finally disappeared from my life when the office modernized, switching to digital logs. I remember the day they removed it. The empty space on the wall felt wrong, like a tooth pulled. I took my last paper card home without thinking and slipped it into the manila envelope. After Charlotte was born, the world narrowed to feedings and naps, to the soft weight of her against my chest, to the smell of clean cotton and milk. My body felt both miraculous and wrecked. I moved carefully, conscious of every ache. Family came by with casseroles and opinions. Advice flowed freely. Enjoy every moment. Sleep when the baby sleeps. As if rest were a simple switch you could flip. Alice hadn't visited before the ceremony. She'd sent a gift instead, expensive, impractical. I thanked her sincerely. I didn't think much of it. Looking back now, I can see how different our trajectories had been, how quietly resentment can grow in the space between experiences, how easy it is for someone who's never had to absorb loss to recoil when it touches them. That manila envelope stayed in its drawer during all of this. I didn't open it, but I thought about it more than once, about what it represented, about how much of myself I'd given away without ever sending an invoice. As Alice's message lingered unread in my phone, I had the strange, unsettling sense that the past, the work, the sacrifices, the things no one saw, was about to be dragged into the present, whether I wanted it or not, and I didn't yet know how much it would cost me. The shift didn't announce itself. It crept in sideways through pauses and looks and small decisions made without me. The first time I felt it, truly felt it, was at a family dinner 2 weeks later. My aunt hosted, insisting it would be nice to clear the air. I almost didn't go. Charlotte had been fussy all day, my body still ached in ways I couldn't explain, and the thought of sitting across from Alice made my chest tighten. But my mother urged me. "Don't make it worse," she said gently, which was her way of saying don't embarrass us. So I went. Oh, the dining room was bright with overhead light that flattened everything. No candles, no warmth, just illumination. Alice arrived late, dressed impeccably again, a different blouse this time. Dark, structured, spotless. She greeted everyone except me. I stood there holding Charlotte, shifting her weight on my hip as my arm trembled slightly from the strain. No one offered to take her. We sat. Plates clinked. Conversation stumbled forward in fragments. Alice spoke to my husband about interest rates. She laughed at something my uncle said. She reached across the table to pass bread, her arm deliberately brushing past me as if I were an obstacle rather than a person. I waited for a glance, an acknowledgement, anything. Nothing came. At one point, Charlotte let out a small sound, not a cry, just a newborn noise, soft and involuntary. I felt the room tense, the way people's shoulders tighten without them realizing it. Alice looked up sharply. "She's not going to do that again, is she?" she said, her voice light but edged. I felt heat rise to my face. "She's a baby," I replied quietly. Alice smiled, thin and precise. "I know, I just thought I'd ask." No one spoke for a beat too long. My fork hovered above my plate. My appetite vanished. Later, when dessert was served, my aunt placed a slice of cake in front of everyone except me. It was subtle, easily excused. She turned back with a little start, as if realizing her mistake too late. "Oh," she said. "Did you want some?" I shook my head. "It's fine." The silence that followed felt heavier than if I'd said yes. On the drive home, my husband kept glancing at me. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm tired," I said, which was true but not complete. The next incident came quietly through my phone, a message from a cousin I trusted. "Hey, just wanted to check in. Alice says you were really dismissive about what happened." Dismissive. I stared at the word until it blurred. I typed a response, deleted it, typed again. "I apologized," I finally wrote. "I just can't pay that amount." There was a long gap before the reply came. "She feels like you're minimizing her loss." Loss. That night, I lay awake listening to Charlotte breathe, the sound shallow and rhythmic. The house felt different, thinner somehow, like the walls couldn't keep things out. The next week, my aunt called again. Her voice was calm, too calm. "We've been talking," she said, "as a family." I braced myself against the counter, fingers digging into the edge. "About what?" "About accountability," she replied. "Alice feels very alone in this." I waited for her to say more. She didn't. "So?" I prompted. "So," my aunt continued, "we think it might be best if you took responsibility, not necessarily the full amount, but something, to show goodwill." My jaw tightened. "You want me to pay her?" "I want you to consider the bigger picture," she said. "This has created tension." There it was again, the quiet rewriting, the shift from what happened to what it caused. "I didn't create this," I said. My voice shook despite my effort to keep it level. My aunt sighed. "No one's saying you did it on purpose." But the implication hung there, unspoken and sharp. After that call, things began to disappear. Not objects, invitations. A cousin's birthday dinner I heard about afterward. A casual brunch that never reached my phone. Photos posted online. Alice smiling, surrounded by family. Captions full of love and togetherness. I saw them late at night, scrolling with one hand while Charlotte slept against my chest. Each image felt like a small door closing. When I did see family, the air shifted around me. Conversations lowered when I approached. Someone would change the subject abruptly. I'd ask a question and get a vague answer, or none at all. Once at the grocery store, I ran into my aunt unexpectedly. She looked surprised, then uncomfortable. "Oh," she said, "I didn't realize you shopped here." I smiled weakly. "It's close to the house." She nodded, eyes flicking to Charlotte's carrier. "Still messy," she said, with a small laugh that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't respond. I couldn't find the words fast enough. The most painful moments were the silences. The way Alice would stop talking when I entered a room, then resume without acknowledging me. The way my mother would hesitate before sitting beside me, as if weighing something invisible. The way messages went unanswered just long enough to feel intentional. One afternoon, my mother came over to help. She folded laundry while I fed Charlotte. The room filled with the soft rustle of fabric and the hum of the dryer. "She's really hurt," my mother said suddenly. I looked up. "Who?" "Alice." I waited. "She feels like you don't care," my mother added carefully. I swallowed. "I care," I said. "I just can't do what she's asking." My mother folded a towel too precisely. "Sometimes," she said, "it's not about what's fair." The words landed like a weight on my chest. That night, I found myself opening the drawer where I kept the manila envelope. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled it out. I sat at the kitchen table, the overhead light harsh, unforgiving. I slid out the contents, old pay stubs yellowed at the edges, dates stamped in ink, proof of years, of hours, of giving. I didn't cry. I just stared. The next humiliation came unexpectedly. At a small family gathering, one I was invited to almost as an afterthought, Alice arrived carrying a garment bag. She placed it carefully on a chair, unzipped it just enough to reveal a pristine blouse inside. "I brought a backup," she said lightly, glancing in my direction, "just in case." Laughter rippled around the room, polite, uneasy. I felt my hands go cold. "I thought it was funny," Alice added, smiling. "Too soon?" No one answered. My throat tightened. I focused on Charlotte's weight against me, on the steady rise and fall of her tiny chest. Later, when I went to the bathroom, I locked the door and leaned against it, breathing shallowly. My reflection stared back at me, older than I remembered, eyes rimmed with fatigue. For a moment, the urge to run, to leave everything behind, to disappear, pressed so hard it nearly knocked me over. I didn't. Instead, I unlocked the door and went back out, my steps measured, my face composed. The final blow of that period came quietly through paperwork. A letter arrived from a mediation service, formal and impersonal, suggesting a neutral discussion regarding a financial dispute. Alice's name was listed. So was mine. I held the paper in my hands, the weight of it disproportionate to its thinness. That night, after Charlotte finally slept, I sat alone in the living room, the lights off except for the faint glow from the hallway. The house felt cavernous, every sound amplified. I realized then that this wasn't about a blouse. It never had been. It was about who was allowed to be inconvenienced and who was expected to absorb the cost. And as the silence settled around me, thick and suffocating, I understood that whatever came next would force me to choose between keeping the peace and keeping myself. The snap didn't come with shouting or tears. It arrived quietly, almost politely, the way realization often does when it's done waiting for permission. It happened on an ordinary morning. Gray light filtered through the curtains, thin and colorless. Charlotte was fussy, not crying, just unsettled, her small sounds threading through the room as I moved slowly, carefully, still sore in ways I hadn't admitted out loud. I had the mediation letter on the kitchen table. I'd left it there the night before, face up, like something that deserved to be seen. The paper was smooth, heavy, official, the kind of envelope that assumes guilt by default. I poured coffee I wouldn't finish and sat down, Charlotte against my shoulder, her weight familiar and grounding. My hand rested on the letter without opening it again. I already knew what it said. Neutral discussion. Mutual resolution. Shared responsibility. The language was clean, bloodless. It erased context with efficiency. Charlotte squirmed, and I adjusted her, rocking slightly. Her cheek pressed against my collarbone, warm, damp. She smelled like milk and sleep. Real things. Things that existed outside other people's narratives. My phone buzzed, a message from my mother. She's agreed to mediation. That's good. It means this doesn't have to get ugly. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered, unmoving, ugly, as if it hadn't already been. Another message followed almost immediately. Just think about what it would cost to keep the peace. I exhaled slowly, my breath catching halfway out. My chest felt tight, not panicked, but compressed, like something had been wrapped too tightly for too long. I looked around my kitchen. The small table, the scuffed floor where a chair leg had scraped years ago, the fridge with magnets holding up drawings from kids who were grown now. Nothing here was decorative. Everything had a job. I thought of Alice's garment bag, the laughter, the careful humiliation dressed up as humor. I thought of the group chat photo. Before. Something inside me shifted, not upward, not outward, but inward, like a door closing gently but decisively. I typed back slowly. I will not attend mediation. The response came fast. What? I'm not paying, I added, and I'm not negotiating. There was a long pause this time, longer than before, long enough that I imagined my mother sitting there, reading and rereading, deciding how to respond. When the phone buzzed again, her message was shorter. This will have consequences. I set the phone down. Charlotte made a small noise, then stilled. I rested my chin lightly on her head, feeling the fine hair beneath my skin. For the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel pulled in two directions. I felt clear. Later that day, while Charlotte napped, I went back to the drawer. The manila envelope slid out easily, like it had been waiting. I carried it to the table and sat under the harsh overhead light, the same one I'd avoided the night before. I opened it fully this time. Pay stubs, old schedules, a folded performance review with my name typed neatly at the top, praise circled in pen I didn't recognize, dates spanning decades, proof not of wealth, but of endurance. I laid them out one by one, smoothing them with my palm. This was my accounting. No one had ever asked for it. No one had ever wanted to see it. But it existed, whether they acknowledged it or not. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Alice. I don't understand why you're being so stubborn, the message read. This could have been resolved quietly. Quietly. The word made my jaw tighten. I didn't respond. Instead, I folded the papers carefully and returned them to the envelope, but I didn't put it back in the drawer. I set it on the counter where I could see it. That afternoon, I took Charlotte for a walk. The air was cool, the sky low and heavy. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk, dry and sharp-edged. Neighbors nodded politely. No one asked questions. With each step, my body felt steadier. Still tired, still healing, but aligned in a way it hadn't been for weeks. When we got home, there was another message waiting. This one wasn't from family. It was from the mediation service, confirming my attendance and requesting documents to facilitate a productive discussion. I read it twice, then once more. I opened a new email and typed carefully, I will not be attending mediation. Please note that I do not acknowledge any financial responsibility related to this matter. I hit send before doubt could creep in. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, expectant. That evening, my husband came home and found me at the table again, the envelope still there. You look different, he said quietly. I decided something, I replied. He sat down across from me, waiting. I'm done explaining myself, I said. I'm done being negotiated over. He nodded slowly. Okay. That was it. No argument, no warning, just acceptance. Later, after Charlotte slept, I checked my phone one last time. There was a message from my aunt sent an hour earlier. If you go down this road, don't expect us to protect you. I read it in the dim light, my thumb tracing the edge of the screen. Protect me from what? The answer came without words. Reputation. Whispering. The version of events that would circulate without my voice in it. I set the phone down and turned off the light. In the dark, my heart beat steadily. Not fast, not slow, just firm. I understood then that the danger wasn't conflict. The danger was compliance. And as I lay there listening to the house settle, I knew that whatever they tried next would force everything into the open, whether they meant to or not. Once the decision settled, the days took on a different texture, not lighter, sharper. I didn't announce anything. I didn't warn anyone. I simply stopped responding the way they expected me to. The first thing I did was slow down, not emotionally, logistically. I began paying attention in a way I hadn't before, as if I were finally reading the fine print of my own life. I started with my messages. I scrolled back through weeks of texts, emails, missed calls. I didn't reread them for comfort. I read them like records, dates, times, language choices. Who said what first? Who escalated? Who implied? Who threatened without using threatening words? I noticed patterns I'd been too tired to see before. How often Alice framed things as misunderstandings while demanding outcomes. How often my aunt spoke for her, translating emotion into obligation. How often my mother softened phrases just enough to make them sound reasonable. Nothing explosive, nothing obvious, just pressure, applied slowly. I created a folder on my laptop and labeled it with the date. No dramatic title, just numbers. I saved screenshots. The mediation letter, Alice's message about responding in kind, my aunt's email suggesting shared responsibility, my mother's text about consequences. Each file landed with a quiet click. Charlotte slept in short stretches then, her naps unpredictable. I worked around them, pausing when she stirred, resuming when she settled. The rhythm was fractured but workable. I didn't feel angry yet, I felt methodical. Next, I called my bank. I didn't tell them the story. I asked questions instead, about liability, about documentation, about whether anyone could claim payment without my consent. The woman on the phone spoke calmly, professionally. She asked for clarification, and I provided only what was necessary. No, she said at one point, you are not obligated to reimburse for incidental damage caused by an infant, absent a signed agreement or negligence. The word negligence echoed in my mind. Thank you, I said, and meant it. I wrote the sentence down afterward, word for word, including the date and time of the call. Then I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Not a lawyer, not yet. A former colleague from the medical office. She'd always been quiet, observant, the kind of person who remembered details long after everyone else forgot them. We met for coffee near her office. I brought Charlotte, who slept through most of it. I didn't dramatize. I didn't vent. I described events plainly. She listened without interrupting, her eyes steady. When I finished, she nodded once. This isn't about the blouse, she said. I didn't respond. It's about control, she continued, and precedent. The words settled somewhere deep. She wants you to admit fault, my colleague added, because once you do, everything else becomes easier for her. What do you mean? I asked. People like that don't stop, she said gently. They expand. I felt a brief, cold clarity. Before we parted, she offered something unexpected. If you need someone to review how things are being framed, language-wise, I can help. Sometimes the smallest phrasing matters. I thanked her. I didn't commit, but I noted it. At home, I began documenting my own behavior. What I said, what I didn't, when I responded, when I stayed silent. It felt strange at first, like watching myself from the outside, but there was power in it too. Distance. Alice sent another message 3 days later. I don't want to escalate this, it read, but you're leaving me no choice." I didn't answer. An hour later, my aunt called. I let it ring. A voicemail followed. "We're worried about you," she said. "This is starting to look bad." I saved it. I noticed how often worry was used as a lever. The next step was practical. I pulled out my calendar and traced the timeline from the ceremony forward. I marked dates, conversations, shifts in behavior. I remembered the garment bag. I wrote it down. The laughter, the silence afterward. Who was present? I remembered the grocery store encounter. The word messy. I added it. I remembered the missing invitations, the photos, the captions. None of it felt dramatic on its own. Together, it formed a shape. One afternoon, while Charlotte napped longer than usual, I opened the manila envelope again. This time, I didn't just look at the contents. I added to it. I printed the mediation letter, the emails, the messages. I slid them in beside the old pay stubs, the decades-old proof of work now sharing space with proof of pressure. The envelope grew heavier, thicker. It occurred to me then that Alice had never once asked how Charlotte was. Not after the ceremony, not during any of the calls, not in any of the messages. The omission was loud. I didn't share that observation with anyone. I kept it. A few days later, my mother stopped by again. She brought soup. She always brings soup when she doesn't know what else to do. She watched me feed Charlotte, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "They're talking," she said finally. "I know," I replied. "They're saying you're being unreasonable." I nodded. "They're saying you've changed." I met her eyes. "I had a baby." She looked away. "They're worried this will define you," she said. That one stung. Not because it was cruel, but because it was revealing. "I'm not the one making it public," I said quietly. My mother sighed. "Alice feels attacked." I didn't argue. I didn't correct her. I simply said, "I feel pressured." The room went quiet. She reached for her purse, then stopped. "If this goes further," she said, "I won't be able to shield you." "I'm not asking you to," I replied. She nodded slowly as if absorbing something new. After she left, I sat at the table longer than necessary, Charlotte asleep in her bouncer nearby. The house hummed softly around us. I realized then that preparation wasn't about proving innocence. It was about refusing to be distorted. That night, I received an email from a community mediator I'd never contacted, referencing a complaint and suggesting amicable dialogue. The sender was polite, neutral, efficient. I read it twice. Alice hadn't waited. I forwarded the email to myself, saved it, and added it to the folder. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I called my cousin, the one who'd first messaged me to check in, the one who still spoke to both sides. She answered on the second ring, surprised. "I don't want to put you in the middle," I said before she could speak. "I just want you to hear this from me." I told her the same thing I'd told everyone else, calmly, briefly. There was a pause on the line. "She's been saying you're refusing to take responsibility," my cousin admitted. "I'm refusing to accept blame for something I didn't do," I replied. Another pause. "That's not how she framed it," my cousin said slowly. "I know," I said. When we hung up, I didn't know where my cousin would land, but I knew she'd heard something new. That was enough. Late that evening, after Charlotte slept, I reviewed everything once more. The folder, the envelope, the timeline. It wasn't about winning, it was about clarity. I closed my laptop and turned off the light. My phone buzzed once more on the counter. A new message from Alice appeared on the screen, longer than the others, its preview cutting off mid-sentence. And before I opened it, I knew that whatever she'd decided to do next would no longer stay behind closed doors. The room was brighter than it needed to be. Not warm, not welcoming, just exposed. We were seated around a long table in a community mediation center that smelled faintly of cleaning solution and burnt coffee. The overhead lights were flat and unforgiving, bleaching color from skin and fabric alike. Charlotte was with my husband in the waiting area. This was one boundary I refused to bend. Alice sat across from me, posture perfect, hands folded on the table. She wore another immaculate blouse, pale blue this time, crisp as a pressed document. Her parents flanked her, close enough to feel like reinforcement. My aunt avoided my eyes. My mother sat beside me, stiff, her purse clutched like armor. A mediator cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming," he began, voice practiced, neutral. "We're here to discuss a financial dispute stemming from an incident at a family gathering." Incident. Dispute. The words felt deliberately small. Alice nodded before he finished, as if agreeing with something that hadn't yet been said. "I just want to resolve this like adults," she said, her voice smooth. Quietly. I noticed how she emphasized the word quietly, as if daring me to make noise. The mediator turned to me. "Would you like to respond?" I took a breath. One. Then another. My hands rested on the table, palms down, steady. "I'm here to listen," I said, "and to clarify what's being claimed." Alice smiled faintly, the corners of her mouth lifting without warmth. "What's being claimed is simple," she said. "Your baby ruined my blouse. It was worth £1,800. I think it's reasonable to expect compensation." The mediator nodded, jotting something down. "Do you have documentation of the item's value?" Alice reached for her bag and produced a receipt, sliding it across the table with deliberate care. The paper was pristine, untouched by pockets or time. "There," she said, "proof." The mediator glanced at it, then at me. "And your position?" I felt the familiar pressure, the expectation that I would soften, explain, apologize again. Instead, I said, "I dispute the premise." Alice's brow furrowed slightly. "Which part?" "That this is a matter of responsibility," I replied, "or that compensation is owed." A murmur passed between her parents. My aunt shifted in her chair. The mediator raised a hand gently. "Let's take this step by step." Alice leaned back, crossing her arms. "Fine." I opened the folder I'd brought with me. Not dramatically, just enough to be seen. "I've been careful not to escalate this," I said. "But since it's been escalated for me, I think it's important to look at the full context." Alice's smile tightened. I slid a single sheet forward. Not toward the mediator, toward Alice. It was a printout of her message. The one that said I shouldn't be surprised when she responded in kind. Her eyes flicked to it, then back to me. "That was said out of frustration," she replied quickly. I felt attacked. "I understand frustration," I said. "What I don't understand is why that frustration translated into pressure, threats, and public framing." Her father cleared his throat. "Threats is a strong word." "I didn't use it lightly," I replied. The mediator glanced between us. "Perhaps we should focus?" "I'm not finished," I said, my voice calm but firm. The room went still. I slid another page forward, then another. Messages, emails. The mediation letter I'd declined. The voicemail transcript my phone had generated automatically. Dates highlighted, language underlined. "This isn't about a blouse," I continued. "It's about control. About forcing an admission of fault where none exists." Alice let out a small laugh. "That's quite a narrative." "I didn't invent it," I said. "I documented it." The mediator leaned in, scanning the pages now. His pen stopped moving. My mother shifted beside me, her breath shallow. I could feel her tension without looking. Alice's voice sharpened. "So what? You're saying I orchestrated some kind of campaign?" "I'm saying you reframed an accident into a moral failing," I replied. "And you didn't do it alone." My aunt stiffened. "This is getting personal," Alice snapped. "It's been personal since the moment you decided my refusal to pay meant I deserved to be isolated," I said. Silence stretched. The mediator cleared his throat again. "Let's maintain." "There's more," I said. I opened the manila envelope. It made a soft sound as it unfolded. Paper against paper. Ordinary. Almost tender. I removed the contents slowly, laying them out one by one. Old pay stubs, dates spanning decades, schedules, performance reviews. "What is this?" Alice asked, impatience creeping in. "This," I said, "is my history." Her mother frowned. "We don't see how this is relevant." "I do," I replied. I picked up one stub. For most of my adult life, I absorbed costs quietly. Time, money, labor, emotional energy. I didn't invoice my family for holidays, hosted, caregiven, emergencies handled. I didn't calculate what it cost me to be dependable. I met Alice's eyes. But the moment your comfort was disrupted, you calculated everything. Her mouth opened, then closed. "This envelope," I continued, "is proof that I've lived a life where accidents happen and we move forward without assigning blame." The mediator's face had changed, less neutral now, more alert. Alice's father leaned forward. "Are you suggesting my daughter is entitled?" I paused, just long enough. "I'm suggesting she's unfamiliar with inconvenience," I said. A sharp intake of breath rippled around the table. Alice flushed. "This is outrageous." "What's outrageous," I said quietly, "is demanding money from a postpartum mother while ignoring the power imbalance you created." The mediator raised a hand but didn't interrupt. Alice turned to him. "This is harassment." He hesitated. "Ms." He glanced at his notes. "Ms. Alice, the materials presented suggest this dispute may involve factors beyond the original claim." She stared at him. "Are you taking her side?" "I'm assessing the situation," he replied. My aunt finally spoke. "This was supposed to be simple." "It was," I said, "until it wasn't accepted." Alice's composure cracked then, not dramatically, but visibly. Her fingers tightened. Her foot tapped once, twice. "She humiliated me," Alice said, her voice rising, "in front of everyone." I didn't raise my voice. "You were humiliated by a baby," I said, "and you chose to punish the mother." The room froze. Even the mediator stopped breathing for a moment. Alice's eyes shone, but not with tears, with something harder. "You think you're so righteous," she said. "You think because you struggled, you get to judge me." "I'm not judging you," I replied. "I'm setting a boundary." She laughed sharply. "By ambushing me with paperwork?" "I responded to escalation," I said. "You initiated it." Her parents exchanged glances. Something shifted there, a subtle recalibration. The mediator sat back. "Given the evidence and the nature of the incident," he said slowly, "it does not appear there is a legal basis for financial reimbursement." Alice's head snapped toward him. "What?" he continued. "Infant behavior does not constitute negligence. Additionally, the communications following the incident suggest undue pressure." The word hung in the air. Undue. My mother made a small sound beside me. Not relief, something closer to reckoning. Alice's face drained of color. "So that's it?" she demanded. "She gets away with it?" I folded the envelope and placed it back into my bag. "No one is getting away with anything," I said. "We're just stopping here." The mediator stood. "I will be closing this matter," he said. "I recommend no further action." Alice didn't stand. She stared at the table, jaw tight. Her mother touched her arm. "Let's go." Alice pulled away. "No," she said. "I want her to admit it." I looked at her then. Really looked. "I won't admit to wrongdoing I didn't commit," I said. "But I will admit this. I will not be treated as expendable to preserve your comfort." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. The mediator cleared his throat again, louder this time. "This session is concluded." Chairs scraped, papers gathered, people stood. Alice rose last. As she passed me, she leaned in slightly. "This isn't over," she said under her breath. I met her gaze without flinching. "It is for me," I replied, and as she turned away, I felt the room exhale. Not in celebration, but in shock at how much had just been exposed, because I knew the real fallout would begin the moment we stepped outside. The quiet afterward was unfamiliar, not empty, just still. like a room after furniture has been moved out and you're hearing your own footsteps for the first time. We didn't speak on the walk to the car. My mother kept her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. My husband waited with Charlotte, her face relaxed, unaware that something heavy had finally been set down. The air outside felt cooler than before, sharper, honest. In the weeks that followed, the noise faded unevenly. Some messages never came. Some people stopped reaching out altogether. A few sent brief notes that tried to sound neutral but carried the faint aftertaste of discomfort. Alice didn't contact me again. I heard about her through fragments, that she was taking space, that she felt misunderstood, that she told people the mediation had been biased. The words drifted toward me secondhand, thinner each time, until they stopped carrying weight. The first family gathering I skipped, no one said anything. The second, someone asked why I hadn't come. The third, they planned around my schedule, not because I demanded it, because silence, once it's no longer obedient, teaches people where the line is. My mother came by more often after that, not to persuade, not to smooth things over, just to sit. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. She'd hold Charlotte, rocking gently, and I'd watch her shoulders slowly loosen, as if she were finally exhaling something she'd carried for years. One afternoon, as sunlight moved across the floor in soft bands, she said quietly, "I should have protected you more." I didn't rush to comfort her. I didn't deny it. I let the words exist between us. "I learned to protect myself," I replied. She nodded. Once. That was enough. The practical changes were small but steady. I stopped explaining myself in advance. I stopped apologizing for boundaries. When people asked leading questions, I answered only what was asked, and nothing more. My world shrank, but it sharpened. There were mornings when I still felt the old reflex rise, the urge to absorb discomfort, to smooth over tension, to pay for peace. It lived in my muscles, not my thoughts, a lifetime habit. When it surfaced, I'd go to the kitchen drawer. The manila envelope stayed there now, no longer hidden at the back. I didn't open it often. I didn't need to. Just knowing it existed, proof of time, of labor, of survival, was enough. Charlotte grew quickly. Her cries changed. Her eyes tracked me when I entered a room. She learned my face before she learned anything else. One evening, as I rocked her in the dim light, she spit up. Just a little, warm against my sleeve. I laughed softly and wiped it away without thinking. No fear, no flinch, just reality. That was when it fully settled. The blouse had never mattered. What mattered was the assumption beneath it, that some people are allowed to create messes and others are expected to clean them up. I no longer accepted that equation. At the next large family event I attended, Alice wasn't there. No one mentioned her. Conversation flowed cautiously at first, then more easily. When Charlotte fussed, someone reached out to help without hesitation. Warm light filled the room. Not perfect, just human. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grounded. Strength, I learned, doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it's just the absence of self-betrayal. Now, when I think of that envelope, the stiff paper, the faded ink, the weight of years, it no longer feels like proof of what I lost. It feels like a record of what I survived. If my story stayed with you, maybe it's because you've been asked to pay for something that was never yours to carry. I kept that envelope for years as evidence of endurance, but I don't need it the same way anymore. Sometimes recognizing your own worth is the moment the ledger finally closes.